Thanks for tuning in to the HR Uprising podcast. I'm your host, Lucinda. The HR Uprising is focused on helping forward-thinking people professionals deliver real lasting value in their organisations. I'm a chartered psychologist, speaker and trainer, and recently authored the best-selling business book, How to Be a Change Superhero. My day job is founder and CEO of software and training business Actus. This gives me the opportunity to work with other businesses like yours. We are focused on building a better workplace for people wherever they are located, with the help of our performance, learning and talent management software and our training and consultancy services. Every week on the podcast, I will be covering different topics and challenges, joined by relevant experts and real-life people professionals. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really hope you enjoy and get value from this week's episode. Hello and welcome to the HR Uprising podcast, and this week's episode continues our high performance HR series. I hope you're finding these useful. I realise they're a bit intense because it's just me, but I suppose what I'm trying to do is provide you with specific actionable tips that I've thought about and planned that can be useful to you to listen to. Wherever possible, I will also provide you with links to videos if you prefer to see content that way, or downloadable content. So you're basically getting information that perhaps we've touched on before in solo episodes, or I've covered on webinars, or just something maybe we've had aspects of when we've had a guest on, but you don't necessarily get all of the detail or the specific data in a planned way. So I suppose I'm treating them a little bit like chapters. And with that in mind, we're now heading on to chapter 5, all about high performance, what drives high performance. Last week, we talked about the absolute vital importance of leadership and management. And now we're going to talk about performance management, which of course, performance management in this context is a process of driving high performance. We're not using it as a term where it's sometimes used where people say, I've got to performance manage someone out of the business, where it's more of a pejorative. No, we're talking about managing performance to be high. And that's what all of this is about, is helping to encourage individuals within our organisation and the line managers to achieve the best possible performance that they can. So this episode, we're going to unpack the key practices that support high performance. Some of those things we've talked about before. I'll reference aspects which are, where's the evidence for high performance? And we've got a download, which is a research review that you can download from the website, all about that, which goes into a number of those high performance practices in more detail. We'll think about what is continuous performance management, which is much more of a frequent message now. When I started out with Actus in 2009, this was quite a new thing. Everything was about just like the annual appraisal. But now more and more people recognise that continuous or ongoing performance management is the way to high performance. However, as HR professionals, how do we make that a reality? It's all very well saying go out and do continuous performance management, but how do you actually make that happen? It's easier said than done. So we'll give you some tips on that. And again, that's a process I've talked about a few times. I've got other reference material that you can access or download if it's something you want to do within your organisation. So hopefully, whether you're in HR or line manager, you're going to find this is something that's of interest and use to you. And there'll be other reference materials you can go on to. So starting with this, what actually drives high performance when we're talking about performance management? What are those key drivers? Well, it's always, if you download the research review, it's not going to surprise many people to know that clear goals supported by regular feedback is the most consistently cited way to achieve high performance. This sort of logic, it was originally came out from Locke and Latham, I think back in the 60s, and this research has been reproduced. So Gallup in 2022 confirmed that employees perform better when they know what's expected of them. In fact, that's probably why their number one question is, I know what's expected of me in their Gallup Q10. So they actually say that employees whose managers help them set clear goals are 3.6 times more likely to be engaged. So there's something key there. It's not about them being set or given the goals, it's engaging those employees in setting it. But they've not done it in isolation either. They've done it in conjunction with their line manager. Of course, those goals, they need to be SMART goals, and I'm not going to go into that in any great detail because there's so many resources that I have out there on this. Suffice to say that SMART is more than an acronym. That would be my key point. So specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, relevant strategy and relevant to the individual, and time bound. And the key is it must be regularly reviewed. Now, I've done a couple of really cute little video segments. You can get any of these things from our Actus YouTube channel. So they're sort of 5 to 8 minute videos, which are really useful in explaining what SMART stand for, more about the acronym, and then also what common mistakes people make when you're trying to set or agree SMART objectives. So if you want some resources to sort of apply to people in your team or your organisation, then do go to our Actus website and look at the Actus Insights series. So they need to be regularly reviewed. We believe that if goal setting is a living, breathing process, it's not something that's gathering dust in a drawer for years or in a folder on your computer nowadays until the annual appraisal, then that's why it's so important, because they've got to be relevant. We are in fast changing times. I've got to say, when I was in a business 25 years ago, my objectives were out of date if they weren't reviewed throughout the year. So think about how quickly things change now. Of course, they're going to be out of date if we're not talking about them relevantly on a regular basis. Then, of course, it's quality feedback. Again, this is something, the key is quality feedback. So real-time constructive feedback, helping people understand how they're doing and where they're improving or where they can improve. This isn't just nice to have, it's absolutely essential. So Harvard Business Review 2021 said that employees who receive daily feedback from their managers are 3 times more likely to be engaged than those who receive just annual feedback. It's hardly surprising. So they are going to be more bought into, they feel supported. I would point out though, it needs to be constructive feedback, and part of that is making sure that it's quite specific. It doesn't have to be, oh, everything you've done is brilliant, and it doesn't have to be great job. Actually, if someone's manager is saying great job every day, you might well think they don't exactly understand what they're doing. But it's specific feedback about, that was great, and it would be even better if you did this, or next time we could include something else. So it's about bringing all of it together and making sure that that line manager, particularly in remote environments, is still actively involved with what the person is doing and delivering. They know they're on track. So that regular feedback is so important. And even more recently, 2023, the Journal of Organisational Behaviour Management supported it, saying that person-mediated feedback, regardless of its content, significantly improves performance, motivation and engagement. Now, I mean, it's interesting. I wonder, this is a slight aside, whether in time we could use AI to do this. I wonder how important it is that it's the human touch, or whether just getting that feedback immediately from somebody. But in order to get your AI feedback, you'd have to go and ask for it. Whereas the key here is your line manager is genuinely invested in the individual. And that for me feels different, where you're actually going to be engaged. You feel valued, because engagement is about people feeling valued and wanting to give back to their organisation. Other critical elements of high performance: ongoing development and coaching. So McKinsey in 2023 said that continual learning and coaching were essential for people to feel valued, to improve and feel valued. And that means that the line manager's style is more collaborative. They're not just pointing at someone saying, you did this right or wrong. They're saying, okay, so how do you think that went? And what do you think you could do even better in future? So that style of providing feedback is helping the individual to think for themselves. And again, I'd say that is particularly important in this remote world that we live in, because people don't always have someone to ask. Recognition and rewards, so we'll do a separate episode on this, but making sure that high performance behaviours and acknowledge them is going to boost morale. So it's reinforcing those behaviours. We want people to feel autonomous, but to know how to do it. So CIPD's evidence review in 2021 said that autonomy and aligning work with their values, so this is about engaging people in those goals, making sure they feel part of it, that fosters engagement and stronger performance. And then the leadership and organisational culture, well, it's what we were talking about at our last episode. I was going to say last week, but actually they're coming out every other week at the moment. So the right culture supports open communication and trust. And McKinsey points out that people-first cultures led by supportive managers will lead to greater retention and motivation. So in short, when we combine aligned goals, quality feedback, include growth opportunities, recognition, and a supportive environment, that's how we create the conditions for sustainable high performance. So culture is going to underpin a lot of this. So having established the principles, how do we make this happen on a regular basis? And that's something that can feel a bit more challenging, if you like. So in this section, let's talk a little bit about what we mean by continuous or ongoing performance conversations. And also we'll then go on to how can we do that? If we are responsible for this as HR professionals, how can we do it? Unlike traditional performance management or old school performance management, which tends to revolve around an annual appraisal, and quite a lot of organisations still do have this approach. Continuous performance management is trying to create a culture of ongoing dialogue between managers and employees. So this is going to include regular check-ins, ongoing goal setting and refreshing them, maybe milestones, and developmental feedback and coaching. So the idea is that this replaces annual appraisals with regular conversations. And the idea is obviously that things are dynamic, so it should be assessed once a year. Now, at Actus, since I started this in 2012, this goes back to my experience within organisations, we have advocated continuous conversations in terms of one-to-ones. So really it's about making sure that we do have at least monthly one-to-ones in a structured way, and they don't sit entirely separately from your objectives and appraisal process. So we advocate incorporating it into one process. Personally, I don't advocate getting rid of the appraisal altogether, and I'll explain why that is, but it's more about making sure that there are regular touch points throughout the year as well as these performance-based conversations. Now, if you're going to make that work in practice, you need to make sure that managers know how to hold an effective coaching style one-to-one. You need to set clear expectations that one-to-one, regular one-to-ones are part of your organisational culture. And I'd advocate using a system, if possible, like Actus, and obviously other systems presumably do this as well, where all in one platform you are able to capture your one-to-ones and the objectives and your development and your appraisals, so it's one complete process. The benefit of doing that, obviously you don't have to do that, but if you keep it separate, and go, okay, we do our appraisal. I'm thinking that says something like the NHS, where you've kind of got a once a year appraisal repository, and then you do the rest of the year. Well, it makes it feel really separate. Whereas if it's all in one platform and all one process, you can check in and go, okay, so where are we against our objectives at this point? Okay, we're a bit off track. Actually, that objective might not be appropriate anymore. So you can make changes throughout the year to prevent getting to the end of the year and go, actually, none of those objectives are relevant at all, but we couldn't be bothered to go into the system, or it was too hard because it had been locked down. Some old systems used to just lock things down, so you couldn't have edited them. So it's really difficult to go back and adapt things throughout the year. So CIPD, they support this approach of ongoing conversations and say that frequent quality conversations are one of the best ways to align performance with strategic objectives. So let's think about what the process might look like. And again, this is where I've done lots of content on this. Check out our YouTube channel if you want to see something video, which is just, I've got some nice shortened ones. And I'll summarise, I have a clock face analogy, which works for a lot of our customers. And they found this has been a great stepping stone. If you wanted to embed a high performance management process in your organisation, you need to prescribe some of it to establish it as a new way of behaving. You can't just go off and have continuous conversations. Well, you can, but nothing will happen because the reality is people will interpret that differently. Whereas if you're quite clear about what the expectations are, think about this as change management. Unless people know clearly what to change, you're not necessarily going to get that. So thinking about what we're trying to do, we want to design a high performance management process. What's that going to look like? Well, thinking about our evidence, We want to make sure that people have got clear goals that align with strategic priorities. We want to embed a culture of regular conversations, so with monthly one-to-ones and potentially quarterly reviews. We want, as part of that, to have a feedback culture where frequent real-time feedback from peers and managers is a normality. From the point of view of development, the way in which the feedback's delivered, it should be developmentally focused as opposed to being critical. So we're encouraging growth through coaching and upskilling people on an ongoing basis. So if we coach and upskill people throughout the year, it's just the way we talk to people. Everyone's getting better on an ongoing basis, and hopefully they're not picking up bad habits. Recognition and feedback, celebrating successes, giving credit where it's due. I mean, some managers just don't think of doing this. So this is something which is really powerful if we can do this. And just that whole way in which ensuring that line managers listen to people, there's a two-way conversation, helping people to feel heard and valued. Maybe you're going to use surveys as well, but really human interaction is going to be the most powerful, particularly when it comes down to performance management, because it's all about that individual's performance. So my clock face approach, and I just say clock face because it's easier for you to visualize it, particularly when I'm describing something to you. If you think about our clock, 12 o'clock is in line with January. So January is the start of your business year. So it might be April or it could be October, whenever your business year starts. What we're talking about there is thinking setting objectives should happen as close to the beginning of your business year as possible. I know there are some organisations, fewer and fewer, that try and run it in line with something like an individual start date. For me, that isn't logical. And the reason I don't think it's logical is that SMART objectives, one of the aspects of a SMART objective that makes it more effective and more motivational is relevance. And the relevance should be relevant to the strategic or business goals of your organisation as well as your individual role. If you started, let's say 3/4 of the way through the business year, then the strategic objectives that you're aligning with are always going to be slightly different. I realise that strategic objectives might go for 3 years or 5 years, so it might not be that bad, but it just feels that there's a natural cascade. We often hear about cascading objectives, and when I say cascading, I'm not saying give everybody the same objective. I'm saying look at where the organisation needs to go over the next 12 months and think about how this person's role can support that and set them an objective that fits it. So at the start of the financial year, I'd say we call it January, 12 o'clock. That's when we should talk about objective setting, really making sure that people have got SMART objectives. There are then going to be various other touch points that I'm going to suggest. And the reason I suggest 4/5 touch points is that that's almost an achievable number of meetings for you to prescribe if you're the HR team. Now, that's the minimum number of formal, in inverted commas, meetings that I would advocate, but you should also be encouraging people to have these ongoing one-to-ones between each one. So those should be supporting and picking up things as you go along, but you're not necessarily going to prescribe those and enforce it if people, be very draconian if people are not holding those as regularly as they should. You're going to let people have a natural cadence with their one-to-ones, but prescribe a minimum of these 4 quarterly touch points. Now, I say quarterly, that works for most businesses. I've found that a number of higher education organisations work really well. If they've got 3 terms or semesters, then maybe 3 touch points in their year. So having something that just makes natural sense with your organisation. So we've set our objectives. Our first touch point that I'm going to say is at 3 o'clock, end of quarter 1. And that's when we should take a bit of a stock of where are we? Our first quarter progress review, take a look how we're doing against our objectives. Are we on track with them? Now, for me, this is an ideal point to give that individual some coaching and possibly some development. It is possible that you might even find that they need some training or development at this point in order to help them achieve their objectives. Perhaps it's something that they've identified that they're not so clear on. They need to learn more about, and they could achieve more in this year if they get the right development. Now, all of a sudden, this is where as I say, 15 years ago, I used to be head of learning and development for an organisation, and I'd get the end of year appraisals, and then people sort of ping out a few development objectives after the end of year appraisal. So in reality, by the time we in learning and development had managed to put that training in place, it was 18 months after the person probably needed it. So now we've got much more opportunity with real-time performance management systems to be able to capture development actions, early in the year, at the end of quarter one, which means that if you've got a learning and development team or your HR business partners, whoever's responsible for it, can help achieve those development needs early to help that person be successful that year, and of course the business. So you can see why that is a high performance thing to do, because you're actually providing that information at a useful time in the year where the person can put it into practice. So end of quarter one, talk about development, obviously refine any objectives if they need to be, if something's changed. Then I say at end of quarter two, 6 o'clock, mid-year reviews. This is where, particularly if you have something where you are going to do performance related pay or you're using ratings, it's really important to have a mid-year review to ensure that there are no surprises at the end of the year. So find out where that person is and just take stock. Are they on track at that point in the year? Now, this area I believe should be like a shorter appraisal, and it's an opportunity for you to, depending on your culture, maybe talk about behaviours. So you could talk about values or competencies, and again, is there any need for development? And of course, are people on track with their objectives? How do we get them back on track if not? How do we tweak the objectives if the business requirements have changed? So that half year point is really important to make sure there's no surprises at the end of the year. And then let's go through to the end of quarter three. Great opportunity for a career aspirations conversation, or where's that person want to go? Again, you could touch on development, but if you think about retaining your top talent, if they're having a really good year and you're getting 3/4 of the way through, you might want to say, okay, where do you want next? The fact that you're taking an interest in them at this point is powerful, keeps them motivated to deliver towards the end of the year. And again, things like succession planning processes like that can take place as well. And then of course, the final touch point, is it a fifth or is it a one, is your end of year appraisal. Now, logically for me, that would happen at the end of Q4, and in an ongoing process at the end of Q4, you'd also set objectives for next year. It is quite natural to close down last year and look forward to next year. But the key for me about this 4 touch point process is that you're talking about performance at the end of quarters 2 and 4. So 12 o'clock and 6 o'clock on my clock face analogy, and you talk about development and career sort of talent retention conversations at the end of Q1 and Q3. That actually makes quite a lot of sense as well. It makes sense because you're having 4 shorter conversations, which gets rid of that 3-hour epic where everyone's lost the will to live by the end of it and doesn't even want to talk about career conversations by then. That becomes the really engaging stuff for the individual, becomes a tick box, because you've had to wade through goodness knows how many objectives and competencies. So it shortens the process, because in theory what you're doing is you're breaking out a 3-hour epic into 4 shorter chunks. So it really makes sense. But also there's a more of a natural style to a conversation that's about objectives and performance compared to development and future aspirations. And it's more natural to be performance focused. But let's imagine you've got someone who actually is off track in terms of their performance at the end of Q2. If you then want to go on to talk to them about where they want to go in the business, that doesn't feel so natural. It feels a bit weird. That's better as a different conversation. So it's different types of conversations then can take place at different times. So it's a really simple concept, but actually I've worked with so many businesses that found that's a really straightforward way to prescribe or embed continuous performance management within their organisations. And once they've established that, so the HR team can keep an eye on those slightly more formal conversations, see if they're actually happening, and then in between, those natural one-to-ones can be peppered alongside it, and before you know it, you've actually got continuous conversations. This is why, for me, you can't just say go off and do continuous conversations. It's naive to think that that will happen. They will lose structure. Some managers might do it brilliantly, some less so, but it won't work so well. And also, if you are a slightly larger organisation and you need to do activities like succession planning, training needs analysis, budgeting for training for next year, those tend to be annual processes. So having it come through peppered at any point in the year is quite hard to manage. So managing something in this sort of way is much more likely to embed it as an ongoing process that you can maintain, as opposed to something which is a bit hit and miss depending on who's doing it in your organisation. So hopefully, if that's something you want to know more about, do look on the links here. I've got different blogs on this so that you can have a look at it. But it is supported by academic literature, because regular developmental conversations definitely improve both individual and organisational performance. Let's be realistic that they don't just happen on their own. Managers, everybody's busy, so having a process where there's a time frame and HR say this has to happen by a certain date means it's much more likely to happen. You give them the right development and it will hopefully happen well. And that goes on to our fourth point. When does this not work? It's not always a silver bullet. Sometimes it doesn't work, and these are the main points I say. Lack of managerial training. Managers who aren't trained to deliver feedback or facilitate coaching style conversations, they might struggle. And if their heart's not in it and it's not being modelled by the managers above them, the feedback becomes superficial or inconsistent. Feedback fatigue is a second one, where potentially the quality of feedback given, or it's not given frequently enough, or it's not got the right purpose or structure, that might lead to disengagement. People feel damaged by it, or they don't trust who's delivering it. In hierarchical cultures, you might find sort of a cultural resistance, where people want to run things a certain way. But again, that's why I would say the proper change management, if you do define something, if you went from, okay, we do once, twice a year annual appraisals, now go off and have continuous conversations, it's just not going to work. So this step that I'm talking about here is probably, this 4-point process is probably a good stepping stone for an organisation who has a once a year appraisal. You're stepping to 3 or 4 touch points. So you're not asking them to talk to each other 12 times a year, which wouldn't realistically happen. Or if you've got no structure, it's a stepping stone. So it works better. And then poor processes or poor documentation or poor systems. So if you can put in place systems like Actus that help to do it, make it easy for people, and the data's all in one place, keep the paperwork simple, then you are much more likely to get those conversations. Light touch paperwork, the emphasis should always be on the conversation. I say 20% systems or paperwork, 80% conversation. But you want the conversation to happen. And if you have got a system that gives a structure, then you're much more likely for it to happen in an effective way. So what do you do? Practical steps to embed this. Once you've designed your process, do invest in communication and training programs that build managers' feedback and coaching capabilities. Embed, have consequences / clearly communicate the expectations, the purpose and the cadence of regular performance conversations. Make sure people know what's expected of them, they know the timetable, and they know, this way if you've got a system, they know that you can see if they're not doing it. So it will be escalated / visible if they're not doing it. Manage the change. If you're going from really pretty much anywhere to 3 or 4 touch points a year, it's going to take 2 or 3 years for it to become process. It doesn't happen the first time, which means you've got to communicate this is expected, you've got to follow up if it doesn't happen, but then people will become more and more compliant with the process. It becomes the norm. And make sure you've got the right behaviours around it and mindset, so people really understand culturally why something's important and communicate the why. I mean, this is high performance series is what we're talking about, but you could just as easily link it to engagement or retention. These activities done well, it should improve performance, it should improve engagement, and it should improve retention. All of those things are linked. So whatever the appropriate motivator is for your business, communicate it in that way. And by the way, make sure you've got leadership sponsorship. I don't think I've emphasised that point enough, but it kind of goes without saying with any change initiative. So, last section, practical tips to make this work. How can you turn these principles into everyday habits? Well, I would absolutely encourage you to choose a system of some description that supports continuous performance management. Obviously, we'd love it to be ours. There are other systems out there, but fundamentally, it's going to be really hard for you if you are operating with paper or Excel because you have no visibility to see whether things are happening. And it's almost wasted investment, if you like, because if you can have a system as an HR professional that gives you visibility that you can respond to, that you can email straight out from, that's going to save you so much time compared to the blanket chasing that you'd have to do to make continuous performance management a reality in a paper-based organisation. Do make sure that the templates that you have are simple and give people the right training, and I say these structured templates that allow people to understand what's expected of them and don't overcomplicate it. I think less is more is so massive in these sort of situations now. Think about making sure that your managers have got the training, but maybe even upward feedback or 360 feedback once you've been doing it for a while, so that your managers and leaders understand whether they're delivering quality or not. And linking on from that, monitor completion and quality, not just quantity. So that again is much easier if you've got a system. You can actually plug in, have a look and see. You could do little spot audits if you wanted. And that doesn't have to be in a Big Brother way. You could see where someone, back in the day, hopefully that doesn't happen so much now. You used to see managers was just going and put 3 dots in forms where they had to do something. They didn't even bother writing anything. So make sure that the quality is there and pick people up on it. For the leaders, make sure that the leadership is leading by example. They've got regular check-ins and being present, so they're walking their talk. Make time for meaningful conversations, even when you're busy. Don't sort of put a one-to-one in and then slide it same day. Ideally, reschedule it if you have to. That happens, obviously, but make sure leaders are aware that the way in which they appear to value those conversations does have an impact on how others perceive them as the way in which they're valued. So I remember there was a sales leader in the business I used to work in, and he would always be late for one-to-ones and very regularly to completely reschedule them at the last minute. Really, this was just about his own poor time management, but it had a real message that the other person wasn't valued. There's always something more important. Make sure people know how to give real-time praise and developmental feedback, and it's a focus on the individual, their goals, well-being and aspirations, and that is something which requires coaching skills. So if you've got a system that can give prompts and nudges, that's really helpful. So notifications or conversation templates, anything that just makes it easier and easier. We're going to be incorporating AI, other systems will too, I'm sure, where people can ask a question or work out how to ask it. You can plan how to have a useful conversation, but hopefully, human nature also allows you to do that. And don't underestimate the value of formal training in this area, because it sends a sign that these behaviours are important. So organisations that invest in building coaching capability often see the biggest shifts, but it takes a bit of time and it's got to be seen as important. Certainly McKinsey said that sort of thing has the biggest impact in culture and performance outcomes. So you need to convince the people with the purse strings, if they're not in your hands, how important that sort of behaviour is. So, in conclusion, high performance isn't a mystery. It is about clarity, consistency and communication. And when employees have got clear goals, regular feedback, opportunities for development, and they feel recognised and supported, performance will follow. It links so much to engagement. We think that performance management should be a positive experience. It should be simple, supportive and strategic. So whether you're reviewing your appraisal process or implementing performance management for the first time, now's an opportunity for you to think about how can we really truly embed continuous performance management and prescribe that structure, that once you've prescribed that framework, ensure the right behaviours sit around it, and it's absolutely going to be a key linchpin for your high performance culture. Thank you so much for tuning into the HR Uprising podcast. As I've said, do visit the show notes if you want some of the links that I referred to. So you just go to hruprising.com, there'll be episode notes, or you can just go to actus.co.uk. We've got so many resources, and also increasingly we're putting things on our YouTube channel where we've got little video clips. And actually, if you don't already follow, or if you're not connected with me on LinkedIn, please do connect with me. We do have a LinkedIn group, but also just connect with me or follow Actus because we've started to put out a monthly newsletter, and that will also have all of this content in there. So that just pops to you through LinkedIn. So that's quite a useful resource, I hope. So really appreciate you tuning in. I recognise that you might be sick of listening to my voice. I think I'm sick of speaking. So thank you if you've made it to the end. And tune in 2 weeks' time for episode 6 on our high performance management process and high performance management tools. And we're going into recognition and other aspects of this going forwards. All right. Thanks again. Bye-bye. I really hope you found this week's episode useful and enjoyable. If you did, perhaps you could recommend us to a friend or colleague, or give us a review on your platform of choice. It really helps new listeners to find us. Now you can access links to any of the information mentioned in this show via the website www.hruprising.com. Further free resources are also available at www.actus.co.uk. There you can also find out more about our software and training solutions. Finally, why not join our LinkedIn group, the HR Uprising, to share ideas and collaborate with other like-minded people professionals. Thank you for listening to the HR Uprising podcast.